The Libris Veritas, the Library of Truth, was not built for comfort, it was built for silence and judgment. Every whispered word echoed with the weight of 500 years of archived knowledge, and every sunbeam that sliced through the Gothic window panes seemed to illuminate a student's inadequacy. It was the only place Alara felt she truly belonged, yet it was also the arena where her quiet brilliance made her the easiest target. The irony was heavy. She could calculate the structural integrity of a Hyperloop bridge in her sleep, but she couldn't navigate a simple conversation without blushing. She carried the weight of a monumental theoretical physics project, a calculation that could redefine quantum energy storage, and with it, the quiet certainty that they were coming for her. They wore tailored wool and silk scarves, their cruelty sharp and polished, unlike the grime and sweat of the construction crew currently tearing up the library's ancient foundation. Alara watched the workers, muscular men in faded hard hats, smelling of sawdust and diesel, from behind a stack of forbidden texts. She knew the students saw ghosts and thugs when they looked at them. But in the deep, troubled gaze of the crew's foreman, a man whose hands were scarred by steel and whose face was a roadmap of hard decisions, Alara saw something else entirely, a promise of bedrock in a world built on shifting sand. The air in the Libris Veritas was thick with the scent of aged paper and new cement. The esteemed St. Jude's University had deemed the ancient library structurally insufficient and launched an aggressive, multi-million-dollar renovation. The high-ceilinged, hallowed study hall, usually a sanctuary of silent contemplation, was now a confusing, dangerous intersection of history and heavy machinery. Alara sat at her customary corner desk, tucked away between the philosophy section and a temporary scaffold draped in industrial plastic. She didn't mind the noise, the screech of drills and the rhythmic pounding of sledgehammers. In fact, she preferred it. The cacophony of honest, physical labor drowned out the far more insidious sounds of the academic elite, the patronizing murmurs, the soft, contemptuous laughter, and the rustle of tailored wool as they passed her by. Alara, 22, was an anomaly at St. Jude's, a scholarship prodigy from a factory town where the hardest math involved inventory counts. Her project, the Veritas model, was an audacious theoretical framework for near-perfect energy transfer, a Nobel-worthy leap that she was terrified of presenting. The presentation was in 48 hours, and her entire life's work, years of calculations, simulations, and proofs, lived exclusively on a single, encrypted research drive taped under her desk. The physical drive was hidden from the Golden Circle. The Golden Circle was not a sanctioned group. It was the name given to the offspring of St. Jude's wealthiest and most influential donors. They were led by Julian Vance, a man whose perfect smile and expensive education masked an almost predatory sense of entitlement. Julian was Alara's primary academic rival, though he didn't seem to grasp that the rivalry was based on his desire to crush her, not on her desire to compete. He was presenting a project on predictive economics, a safe, uninspired topic. Alara's success would not just overshadow him, it would expose his intellectual mediocrity. Julian found her precisely at 10:15 a.m., as reliable as the movement of the earth. He didn't approach her desk. Instead, he leaned against a marble pillar 10 feet away, flanked by his two acolytes, the perpetually sneering twins, Marcus and Silas. Alara, Julian's voice carried just enough volume to breach the wall of sound from the construction zone. Still clinging to that little nook? Hope the dust hasn't compromised your little theory. Alara's fingers, cold despite the warm room, paused over her equations. She kept her eyes glued to the screen, unwilling to grant him her attention. They're working on the foundation, Julian, she mumbled, pushing her glasses up her nose. The dust is everywhere. Ah, metaphor, he chuckled, a low, dismissive sound. No, I meant the dust of obscurity. You know, you really should consider simplifying your presentation. No one likes a show-off, especially when the ideas are, well, they're just too ambitious for someone of your background. It screams overcompensating. Marcus and Silas laughed on cue. It was always the same routine, subtle yet effective. It wasn't just the words, it was the way the other, higher status students nearby would lower their heads or pretend to read, offering tacit agreement with Julian's assessment. The cruelty wasn't a sudden slap, it was 1,000 tiny pinpricks of social rejection, designed to drain her confidence before the final deadline. A high-pitched screech from the construction zone suddenly cut off their laughter. A group of the workers, on their mid-morning break, were passing through the study hall toward the emergency exit, their heavy boots scuffing the temporary protective sheeting on the floor. Alara glanced up as they walked past. They were a world apart from the students, dressed in faded denim and neon vests over dusty sweatshirts. They carried lunch pails, not leather briefcases. They spoke in short, practical sentences about bracing and load-bearing walls, not abstract theory. Leading them was the foreman, Mac. He was a man of 40-something, built like a fire hydrant, with calloused hands and eyes the color of worn granite. He wore a single, thick silver band on his right ring finger, and a tattoo of an intricate, geometric knot peeked out from under the collar of his hard hat. He was an observer. Alara had noticed him before, often pausing by the scaffolding to silently watch the students. As Mac passed, Julian, seeking to regain control of the social space, made a gesture of exaggerated disgust. Honestly, St. Jude's should cordon off this section entirely. The smell of asphalt and BO is hardly conducive to advanced research. Mac didn't turn around, but his shoulders seemed to tense just a fraction. His crew kept moving, trained to ignore the casual snobbery of the university population. But as he reached the exit, Mac stopped and glanced back. His gaze bypassed Julian entirely, sweeping over the polished arrogance of the Golden Circle, and settled, momentarily, on Alara. In that brief moment, the sheer exhaustion on his face, the quiet fortitude, met Alara's anxiety. It was a connection born of mutual invisibility. He was the foundation the students walked on, she was the theory they sought to dismiss. Mac gave a single, almost imperceptible nod, a gesture she couldn't interpret, and then he was gone, the heavy exit door closing behind him with a low, hydraulic sigh. Julian, misreading the exchange entirely, scoffed. See, Alara? Even the hired help knows not to get involved. Now, run along, finish your little homework. Don't want to be late for your own failure. He walked away, his mission accomplished. The seeds of doubt were planted. Alara's heart pounded against her ribs. She tried to focus on the quantum field calculations, but the complex equations swam before her eyes. Julian's words were a poison, and she was desperate for the antidote. She worked for another hour, meticulously checking and rechecking the encryption on her drive. At 1 p.m., she made a mistake. She needed a rare, archived text from the basement, a source she needed to cite in the final abstract. It was 10 minutes down and 10 minutes back. Her entire future was taped beneath a mahogany desk in an area surrounded by scaffolding, under the noses of her rivals. "It will be fine," she told herself. No one is that brazen. They only do their work in the light. She was wrong. Julian and his circle had been waiting. They were not brazen, they were systematic. They knew the library's rhythms, the janitor's route, and Alara's habit of solitude. They had watched Mac and the crew leave. Alara, clutching the dusty text, was halfway up the main stairs when she heard muffled voices from her corner, not the normal student chatter, but low, conspiratorial urgency. Her blood ran cold. She pressed herself against the cold, limestone wall of the staircase, her breath catching in her throat. "I need 5 minutes, Julian, this is nuts," she heard Marcus hiss. Julian's voice was sharp, cutting. "It's necessary. I told you, her theory is too clean, too novel. She'll redefine the field. We take the drive, upload a ghost file, a corrupted shell. When she tries to access the real data for the presentation, she'll have nothing but zeros. We blame the construction dust, the network fluctuations. It's untraceable. And if she has a backup? She won't. She can't afford cloud storage, and she's too paranoid to trust the university server. Everything is on that USB-C drive. Now, hurry. I'll cover the corner. It needs to look like a simple, petty theft, a distraction, if anyone even notices. A rush of adrenaline, cold and electric, flooded Alara's system. They weren't just trying to make her feel bad, they were trying to annihilate her academic life. She didn't have time to call the librarian, the police, or anyone. She had two choices: confront the three of them or find help, fast. Her eyes darted around the study hall. The few remaining students were deep in their textbooks, wearing noise-canceling headphones, oblivious. The only humans nearby who knew how to handle a physical crisis, who understood how to act when things needed to be torn apart and rebuilt, were the construction crew, and they were outside on their break, probably miles away by now, getting coffee or lunch. But wait. She remembered the sound, the distinct, mechanical whir that had momentarily stopped the Golden Circle's laughter an hour ago. That wasn't a sledgehammer. That was the sound of a mini-lift being lowered into the subbasement. They hadn't left the building entirely. They were below the foundation. Alara quietly ditched the textbook and moved with an urgency she didn't know she possessed. She skirted the main hall, ignoring the tremor in her legs, and instead of going to her desk, she ran straight for the construction zone's emergency access door, the one Mac had used, and slipped through it. The door led not to the outside, but to a temporary staircase winding down into the depths of the library's foundation, a place of dust, echoing metal, and forgotten things. Introduce Alara, the St. Jude's Library, Libris Veritas, and the high-stakes project, Veritas Model. Detail the contrast between the elegant, judgmental students, the Golden Circle, and the ignored, physical laborers. Mac and his crew. Julian Vance initiates the psychological harassment. Mac offers a silent, enigmatic nod. Alara overhears Julian's explicit plan to sabotage her research drive moments before the presentation deadline. She realizes she cannot confront them and instead makes a desperate dash into the construction zone, the foundation of the library, to find the crew. Alara finds Mac in the dimly lit subbasement, covered in dust, working on a complex brace. She breathlessly explains the situation, her academic, abstract terror translating into a raw, physical plea for help. Mac, initially skeptical of student drama, is convinced by the sheer, cold panic in her eyes and the gravity of the betrayal. Mac and his key crew members, e.g., Silas, a master electrician, and Ray, a former security guard, mobilize. They understand that the Golden Circle is already at Alara's desk, the unorthodox plan. The crew cannot simply stop the students, that would be a legal mess. Instead, they use their unique knowledge of the building's infrastructure. Silas uses his knowledge of wiring to create a localized, temporary power surge, a hiccup, targeting Alara's desk area. This is a distraction to force the students to pause or drop the drive. Mac, using the old, forgotten utility tunnels and ducts he has mapped out, cuts off Julian's escape route. He doesn't engage in violence but uses his sheer physical presence and knowledge of the building's hidden choke points to corner Julian. Julian, panicking, throws the drive down a decommissioned, dusty ventilation shaft, intending to destroy it completely. Mac, without hesitation, descends into the shaft and retrieves the drive, but it's physically damaged, the casing cracked. Julian escapes, believing his mission is complete. The drive is recovered but corrupted. The presentation is hours away. Alara is devastated. Mac, holding the damaged drive, looks at her and says, "We built this place. We know how things break. We also know how they get fixed." The presentation is in 4 hours. Mac takes Alara to their site trailer, their true sanctuary, a messy, functional workspace. Silas, the electrician, reveals he's also an amateur computer repairman who knows a lot about hardware from working on industrial machines. He stabilizes the cracked casing while Alara works frantically to recover the data. They work side by side, the quantum physicist, the foreman, and the electrician, united by a single piece of damaged plastic and metal. Julian, learning Alara made it to the presentation hall, even if she appears empty-handed, escalates the attack. He and his father's lawyers leak a story to the student paper, accusing Alara of research fraud and using unauthorized, non-academic personnel to interfere with her work. Alara begins her presentation, the repaired drive successfully reading her data. Julian attempts a public interception, citing the leaked article and demanding she be disqualified for cheating. The university dean is present, caught between institutional donors, Julian's family, and the truth. Just as Alara is about to be silenced, Mac and his crew walk into the lecture hall, not in their work clothes, but cleaned up, wearing their silver rings and sturdy boots. They have come to testify. They didn't just fix the drive. Ray, the former security guard, had rigged a temporary construction camera to inadvertently capture Julian throwing the drive and their general abusive behavior. Mac presents the evidence, not as academic theory, but as a plain, unvarnished fact of a crime committed on university property. Julian is expelled and his family's donation is scrutinized. Alara's Veritas model is hailed as a success. She realizes the Libris Veritas is not just about books, it's about the people who hold up the truth. Mac doesn't want money or praise. He tells her, "You are a quiet architect of the future. Never let a bully tell you what you're worth." The workers, the quiet architects, give her a small, intricately carved metal knot, a symbol of the connection that binds them. Alara finally finds her courage, her voice, and her true family.